Welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, and a panel handpicked of four distinguished international correspondents stepping back from the immediacy of the breaking news to reflect on the last 7 days in global affairs. In a week, an interim peace agreement was signed between the US and Iran, bringing a temporary end, it seems, to the conflict and the beginning of a 60-day window to negotiate the many unresolved issues. President Trump signing the Memorandum of Understanding over dinner at the Palace of Versailles, and before he had time to digest his dessert of hot chocolate pie and French vanilla ice cream, there were already grumblings within the Republican Party that a military win had turned into a strategic defeat. Iran's supreme leader claimed Trump had made a deal out of desperation, but it was bravo and cheers at the Château.
Great job. Bravo.
Oil down, stock up, said Trump. It's been a week that's seen the leaders of the G7 nations meet lakeside in Geneva. It was in Evian, 5 decades on from the inaugural meeting in France, established to work out how to deal with the global economic turbulence in the aftermath of the oil crisis of 1973. France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and the US back alongside Canada. This year, some other hand-picked leaders were invited. The Prime Ministers of India, Kenya, the Presidents of Brazil, Turkey, Egypt and the UAE, the Emir of Qatar and, which we'll be discussing in the programme tonight, the new faces at the table, the bosses of big tech as well. Canada's Mark Carney said the old ritual gathering is useful for, quote, weaving strands of a new world order through broader engagement. But the G7 no longer pretends to run the world. We also got a glimpse into what else leaders chat about amongst themselves, and it was bravos for Giorgia Meloni.
Good morning. Yes. Wake up. No.
It's been a week that's seen President Zelensky secure renewed Western commitment at the G7, with European leaders talking of an apparent renewed focus and tone from President Trump. This time last year, Trump compared the war to two boys fighting in a park. Sometimes you're better off leaving them to it, he said. This week, he's put his name to a joint statement declaring, quote, unwavering support for Ukraine and backed calls for increased pressure on Russia. And while he stopped short of criticising Putin, he said Moscow should make a deal.
So yes, I am firmly convinced that this Evian summit is a deep change in approach. A will on the part of the United States to work with Europeans to support Ukraine.
It's been a week of World Cup fever and of some Japanese supporters going viral for tidying up the rubbish in the stadium after their match. The excitement was encapsulated live on air by Fox 4 reporter Tisia Mazonga and the Japanese fan Hiroshika Nakakuki.
Okay.
It's live?
Yes, it's live. Baby.
Yeah.
How excited are you?
Yeah.
You were so excited, right? Japan, right?
Excuse me.
Okay.
I cannot speak English, but I'm excited!
I love it! Yeah, baby! Let's go!
Japan!
Japan, baby! Look, I just lit.
Honourable mentions for headline writers in London after England's 4-2 victory against Croatia. Plaudits go to the Sun, who ran with Texas Kane score massacre after Harry Kane's 2 goals. And it was the Sun responsible for possibly the best football headline of all time. Remember, 2000, when Caledonian Thistle defeated Celtic in the studio. They're nodding, they do, get ready for it. Super Cali go ballistic. Celtic are atrocious. That was Scottish Sun's Paul Hickson who came up with that. OK, let's meet the World This Week squad tonight. In the studio with me, a warm welcome to Anne Bagamarie, and it is warm, a very warm, kind of cool welcome. It's a heat wave in Paris. Great to see you. Independent journalist Anne Bagamarie, consultant, former senior editor of the International Herald Tribune and New York Times Style magazine. A word on NATO 3.0. Did you see this week Pete Hegseth saying that he's going to, in Brussels, he's going to take 6 months to review the presence of US forces in Europe. He said some will pass with flying colours. Others, he said, are free riding.
Oh, they must all be terrified. They must be trembling in their boots. Every time an announcement comes from President Trump or his cabinet, it's tempting to see that as an important moment in the history of whatever they're talking about. I mean, you saw President Macron talking about that with the G7 and with the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding. I think it really behooves us all to take a step back and look at not only who's talking, but what authority they might have and what knowledge they might have in order to make a statement like that. So if you're asking me what does it mean that the U.S. Secretary of War, as he likes to call it, is going to review the presence of troops in Europe, you know, we can look back and say, well, Donald Trump has made no secret of the fact that he really doesn't care about Europe. And I think you can juxtapose that with what President Macron said about the U.S. signing on to unconditional support for Ukraine, and you can put it all together and decide we have no idea what he's talking about.
It's a very good point, and I'm looking forward to your insight through the programme. Let's also welcome Paris-based independent correspondent Francis Collings, who's with us in the studio. Good evening, Francis.
Good evening.
Welcome to the programme. Francis is former reporter, presenter with the BBC. He's worked for outlets including Associated Press and Monocle Radio. Francis, let's talk about Andy Burnham. Because what's just happened across the Channel in Makerfield, this is a northern constituency that was often associated with either pie-eating championships, Northern Soul and Rugby League, but possibly not anymore.
No, Andy Burnham is the new MP for that constituency, and we are led to believe is going to be challenging to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer today saying he'll meet any challenge. You know, there's a part of me that does feel a little bit sorry for Keir Starmer, because I think he does do a lot of good, but I've rarely seen a government that does such good and is so bad at selling anything good that they do. You know, there's been a number of achievements, and we were chatting outside about the internet ban on 16-year-olds. It never really gets sold. He is not a good communicator, so Labour are going, it seems, for someone who can communicate, got a very good result, and more importantly, got a good result against Reform, the right-wing party, which I think is going to count in his favour in the long run.
Good to have you with us as well, Francis. Let's move from the studio. Let's go to Berlin. Let's bring in our next guest, the Wall Street Journal chief political European reporter, Bojan Pančevski. Good evening, Bojan.
Good evening. Hi, how are you?
Great to see you. Bojan is the first and only non-German recipient of the Werner Holzer Prize for Outstanding International Reporting. He was part of the Wall Street Journal team shortlisted for a Pulitzer for reporting on Russia's detention of Evan Gershkovich, and is the author of The Nord Stream Conspiracy, the inside story of the explosions that shook the world, published this week. Bojan, your book is about the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipeline in 2022, supplying Russian gas to Germany. This is an incredible story you've captured.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you'll enjoy it. It's available in bookstores and Amazon as of this week. And that picture you're showing shows that it wasn't just Germany involved in Nord Stream, especially Nord Stream 1, the older part of the double pipeline. You can see on that picture Mark Rutte, the then Dutch Prime Minister, who has since reinvented himself as a Russia hawk and is now head of NATO. You can see there François Fillon, the then French Prime Minister, Günther Oettinger. He was then, I think, Energy Commissioner representing the European Commission, the executive body of the EU. So Nord Stream was a kind of a pan-European project that went up in smoke, together with a school of thought about how to deal with Russia and how kind of becoming interwoven with the Russian economy might prevent conflict. So that's an interesting point I also address in my book, and we are witnessing now the efforts to negotiate with Russia. So kind of Nord Stream was a steel and concrete version of that idea that if you enter commercial relationship with someone like Russia, that eventually conflict will become obsolete, and that didn't seem to have worked.
It is an incredible story. If you're wanting to know more and have a deep dive of Bojan's take on it, have either on France 24 website or on YouTube, if you look up Does Putin Want to Live Forever? Bojan's also been investigating that. And of course, read the book as well. I'm looking forward to reading it. It's great to have you with us tonight, Bojan. And from Berlin, let's go back to the studio, because in Evian all week was Richard Worley. He's back. It is great to have you back as well, Richard.
Thank you, Gavin.
Richard Worley is Europe correspondent for Switzerland's most widely read newspaper, Blick, author of the book Cette Amérique qui nous déteste, This America That Hates Us, and Ball of Illusions, What France Believes and What the World Sees. Richard, we're going to be talking about in detail what you've seen and heard out there this week. But first of all, take us back to Switzerland for a moment, voting against the capping the size of their own population at 10 million in a referendum. Why?
Well, a strange referendum, you may think, voting on the capping of the population. Actually, it was not a vote on the capping of the population. It was a vote against immigration and against the EU, because by proposing a cap on the population, the National Populist Party, UDC, SVP in German, knew perfectly that it would put in danger all bilateral relations with the EU, and those bilateral agreements being based on free flow of trade and people between Switzerland, which is not a member of the European Union, and the EU. And the promoter of this initiative, because in Switzerland you can vote either if the government proposed to vote on a certain subject, or if people decide to vote, it's an initiative, you collect 100,000 signatures and then something is put forward to vote. And the proposal from UDC was actually to vote for the capping of 10 million, and then the immediate follow-up would have been the collapse of the bilateral relation with the EU. And the answer of the Swiss people was no. It was no by a margin of 54%, above what the polls predicted. So my analysis is that a majority of Swiss people do understand that the best chance for the country at the moment, though it remains outside of the EU, is to have a stabilized relation with the grouping. Now, let's also look at the reality. Switzerland is a fractured country. Mm-hmm. You have the countryside. You have the alpine part of Switzerland, which is still against the EU very much and voted for the capping of the population. And you have the Switzerland of the cities, Zurich, Geneva, Basel, and who voted for the EU. So, but I think that is a fracture and that is a divide that it's very difficult to heal. And I believe all European countries do face the same problem, and probably the United States as well.
I should have said, Richard, the award-winning Richard Worley. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well,
you have news.
You'll be invited on the 29th of June for this Prix de l'Initiative Européenne that was not only awarded to me, but also to Joël Meskens, the correspondent from Le Soir daily newspaper.
Well done. This is the Paris Award for best journalism in Europe.
True.
Great that you're on the programme. Right, we begin. No hydration breaks for the next half hour. We get started, and we start in the Hotel Royal at the Belle Epoque Palace on the shores of Lake Geneva at the foot of the Alps, where at 8 o'clock on Monday evening, the G7 leaders and prime ministers, presidents invited by President Macron were chewing over the major world affairs of our time, working over a working dinner entitled Working Together to Address Major International Challenges. And over a Michelin quality meal of garden vegetables, lake fish and mountain cheese, they discussed the possibility of peace in Iran, the challenge of China, and how to deal with Putin, according to the readout from the office of Sanae Takaichi, the Japanese Prime Minister. Over the course of 3 days, we got to see the power of personality politics, the matter of sustaining President Trump's attention. The event was carefully orchestrated by the French not to clash with Trump's birthday and the celebratory cage fight on the White House lawn, and keep him engaged with a personal invite to later dine like royalty at the Palace of the Old Sun King at Versailles. And throughout the week, the world's most powerful leader never forgot where the camera was.
Hello.
I'm the boss.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Richard Worley, take us inside what was going on this week. There were many incidents picked up. The German football shirt presented to President Trump. We had Friedrich Merz, as well as the round table dinner, which Keir Starmer vanished from at one point. Take us inside the power politics going on, what you were picking up.
Well, it's the diplomacy of flattery, because, you know, right now, a G7 summit is a summit where you have to handle Donald Trump like a grenade. You have a grenade in your hand, and at any moment it can explode. So the main challenge for the president of the summit, and that was France this year, is for the grenade not to explode. And if Donald Trump attends all session, which was the case for this summit, then double victory. He has not exploded, and he has been present. Now, did he listen? Did he care about the subject? Will he change his opinion one day after or 2 days after? That's not the issue. The issue was he was there, he participated, he signed a communiqué on Ukraine, a communiqué that is entitled Geopolitical Communiqué of the G7. So that means the United States officially is backing Ukraine resistance to Russia, and President Macron was very, very happy. But one thing, a small anecdote, normally the ultimate press conference belongs to the president of the G7. You have a summit, and the last press conference is the press conference of the president, not in Evian, not with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the latest press conference at the very end before boarding to Versailles. So you may think he's blunt, but indeed he was the boss.
We're going to get on to Iran and Ukraine in a minute. It's a very, very interesting point you're making, Richard. And just looking at the power dynamics in the room, not everything was it seemed, because I mentioned the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. The Japanese press this week were talking about how if only the Japanese PM could be like Giorgia Meloni of Italy, the way she stands, talks, the close relationship. And yet not all has been what it seems there. Those two now, Trump and Meloni, have fallen out.
I don't see how anybody can assume that they have a close relationship with Donald Trump. I think it's something that happens in the blink of an eye, and you've put your finger on it. He's a hand grenade, and somebody has pulled the pin, and everybody has to worry about what he's going to say next, what he's going to do next. So the idea that Giorgia Meloni and Donald Trump had mended their fences and were best buddies at the summit, the idea that the Japanese prime minister might one day aspire to that kind of relationship. Look around at the G7. Emmanuel Macron at one time thought, I think it was during Trump 1.0, that he thought he would have that kind of relationship. Keir Starmer went to the White House and showered him with gifts and lavish praise in the hopes that Trump would return the favor. And maybe he did. And maybe he was always going to do that. But honestly, what does it mean? What does it get you? Mm-hmm. What is the solid result and the good result for the world of that happening? I wonder when I see something like this, with Donald Trump being handled with kid gloves, given the speaker's spot, invited to Versailles to sign a piece of paper and brandish it like Neville Chamberlain at Munich. And a lot of other people have mentioned that analogy. I wonder what would be so terrible about the hand grenade going off in the middle of the G7. I understand that Emmanuel Macron probably wanted, a more collegial and a meeting and a better outlook and better pictures. But honestly, what would be the downside if Donald Trump got up, stormed out, and didn't give the last press conference?
I guess
what would have been
the point? To that point, and it's not the first time this has been mentioned, it's very interesting. I've heard this from diplomats in Brussels. To that point, trade, money, finances, the effect economically to Europe if a capricious president suddenly decides, right, I'm going to full barrel like he did with China at 140% tariffs.
Well, okay, tariffs can be turned back. We know about Trump tariffs. We know how he chickens out of these. But Donald Trump has not even been telegraphing. He has been saying for both of his presidential mandates and even before that Europe was a free rider. Europe is out to screw the United States of America. We don't care about Europe. Europe needs to stand on its own 2 feet. This didn't happen yesterday. This has been happening for more than a decade. And quite frankly, I found it very interesting that Trump signed on to the communique, the G7 communique. I don't think personally that it evinces any kind of new solidarity with Europe. I think Macron probably exaggerates things. It's a new deep commitment. Do you know what I mean? Based on what happened this past week with Ukraine bombing the oil refinery in Moscow, we all saw the pictures. This ball of fire and the lid of the refinery coming off. Struck at the heart of Moscow and said to the Russian people, said to Putin, you want to attack Ukraine? Well, your Moscow is going to suffer as well. Ukraine, this week anyway, and perhaps for some time to come, looks like the winner in this particular conflict. And Donald Trump loves a winner. So if he is now backing Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, it may be just as ephemeral as everything else in his life.
I think you've summed it up, and I've read this a few times, that Trump essentially is a binary person. He likes winners, he likes losers. When Zelensky was in the White House, he was a loser. He had no cards. Well, now he does have cards, it seems. And I think that Macron and the other leaders have worked Trump out in terms of the flattery, which has been ongoing for years. And yes, it may not get you long-term concrete gains. It gets you possibly something short term. I think Keir Starmer found that with a trade deal, but yes, then things went slightly awry. But when it comes down to saying, look, these guys are the winners and Putin is the loser, I think it appeals to something in Trump. He's a binary individual.
I heard one commentator, Francis, talk about witnessing the power drain from Keir Starmer. He asked for a bilateral with President Trump. He didn't get one. And to Anne's point as well, Francis, not everybody was happy in the court of Trump, and making it clear they didn't care if to quote Richard, the explosion of the grenade goes off. This is Brazil's President Lula, who said this week. The brief encounter they had, they didn't have a bilateral. He said they didn't ask for one. He said because, quote, he talks a lot, he listens little, and he acts like an emperor. Stay out of Brazilian elections.
Yeah, interesting. But I got a feeling people... It's no surprise the way we've had a lot of practice watching Trump over his first administration, now his second one. And I think Versailles was a bit of a masterstroke. It's humming with gold. It appears to Trump. It's historical. What a place to sign a deal. Let's see how long that lasts.
Boyan, you and I have reported from G7s in the past in our days in Brussels. Has there been an evolution with the G7, or is this playbook G7?
I think G7 is different with Trump in it. That's a very obvious thing that the previous speakers have noted. And however, it's also, I think, fair to assume that nobody really cares that much anymore, certainly not in Europe, because after the controversy over Greenland, the Europeans mentally shifted a gear, right? They were trying to appease Trump for the best part of last year. And after he kind of signaled that he would actually possibly take Greenland by force, I think something kind of snapped in the minds of the, certainly the leaders of France, Germany, England, Poland, etc. And I think they've crossed a certain bridge and they're not coming back. And in terms of Ukraine, Trump's got nothing more to offer. America is not supporting Ukraine or Europe in its support of Ukraine. They're selling weapons. They're selling ammunition. That's also a problem because their industrial capacity turns out to be very limited. So they can't even produce enough Patriot interceptors for the crucial air defenses. So, the role of Trump is much diminished, right? And after this, Versailles is such a historic venue to sign a terrible deal like he did sign. And, a lot of people made fun of it. It became a meme on the internet, including people from the MAGA community that, Versailles stands for capitulation, right? And in a certain way, he did capitulate in front of the mullahs, whom he attacked, and then in the end he signed a deal which, by all accounts, may end up worse than the deal Obama signed. Yes. And he obviously criticized that deal very much. So I don't think, he's kind of turned himself in a bit of a lame duck, right? In terms of power politics, in terms of the tariffs, he's got legal problems at home with the tariffs. The EU has shown that if they show teeth, if they show strength, he backs off. They threatened to sell treasuries. They threatened to raise their own tariffs. He backed off. He publicly spoke about how the market was upset and how it cost him a lot of money, that conflict with Europe. So, I think it's coming to an end, this kind of endless ability to kind of apply the madman theory turned flesh, Well,
let's set up the context.
He's certainly come to his limits.
Let's see, because let's go to Versailles. Let's set up the context as Boyan was talking about. Wednesday, 11 p.m. is when the first reports came through that President Trump had signed this Memorandum of Understanding to extend the ceasefire with Iran, the Strait to open up, the Strait of Hormuz, with more substantive talks to begin. The New York Post said it was signed in trademark Trump style, that it's Sharpie in hand, giving out markers as mementos as he did for executive orders gone by. Marco Rubio, alongside, called it a pretty key moment in history that we're sharing together. By contrast, in Tehran, just a few images were available to the press of President Pezeshkian signing the agreement. And at that point, We saw a few hours go by and US mine clearance operations confirmed to be in full swing in the Strait of Hormuz, estimated 80 mines still to be removed from, those placed by the regime. And an update came from the Revolutionary Guard, quoting the injured Ayatollah, Mujtaba Khamenei, saying, quote, it was the American president who, out of desperation, used all kinds of leverage to bring this about, which takes us back to the Versailles Agreement. And new direct talks are supposed to be happening today. They didn't start. Iran, Lebanon blaming Israel. J.D. Vance, President Trump, quite clear in their criticism of Israel potentially breaching this agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think anybody should be surprised if everything starts to unravel right now. There was a wonderful column in the Washington Post by my old boss at the Herald Tribune, David Ignatius. He set out 2 signposts that we should all be watching for to see if Iran is in fact going to do all of the things that the Americans hope that they do. And it's all about hope right now, because while the Iranians are going to get money behind this MOU right now, the rest of it, the benefits to the U.S., the benefits to the rest of the world, are all very much on hold to see about the goodness of the hearts of the Iranians and whether they are willing to risk the Americans bombing them again if they don't play ball. So David talked about being able to see whether the Iranians were going to be transparent about the mining operations and whether the demining operations were going to start right away. And apparently they have. Okay, so that's one. And the second one had something to do with being transparent about the enriched uranium. Letting the
the nuclear dust, the IAEA.
Nuclear dust, the IAEA back in again, which of course the IAEA had come in several times under the Obama agreement signed in 2015, which Donald Trump, not 2015, but signed by the Obama administration, which Donald Trump never ceases to make fun of. So there are a couple of signposts along the way where we can see whether Iran is actually going to do what Trump seems to think they have agreed to do, which they have not agreed to do. The amazing thing about this MOU is not just the fact that it seems to be a capitulation, as Boyan said. The desperation was so very clear in the way that this was done quickly. It's done before July 4th, our great national holiday. It's done because there's pressure on the current administration and the Republican Party ahead of the midterm elections in November to bring down the price of oil and to stop the rampant inflation that's coming from this conflict with Iran. That's the desperation. And everybody knows that and the Iranians clearly knew that since Trump was desperate for a deal and he had a deadline, that's a position of weakness from the very start.
Richard, capitulation, Anne and Boyan. Marco Rubio says this is a pretty key moment in history, was the quote. First of all, is it? And secondly, from the framework right now, the 14 points, President Trump wants to get a better deal than President Obama. Can he still do that with this?
I would personally not call it a capitulation. Capitulation would mean that Iran is the clear winner. Iran is not the clear winner. Iran is weakened. It has cost a lot to the US, a lot to the international community. And let's see what the Trump administration will get out of Iran in terms of the nuclear facilities, the access to nuclear facility, the dilution of the enriched uranium. For the moment, we do not know where these 60 days will lead, but we should be a bit prudent and let's see what will happen. But it is starting badly. One point is that Donald Trump is smart in a way, because he has found, and I was there at the press conference, you probably viewed that press conference of the G7, he has found a new argument. He is the savior of the world economy. The world economy would have collapsed if he had not signed that agreement. You may consider it completely cynical, because he is the one who put the fire.
He's an arsonist.
He's an arsonist, and he claimed to be a fireman. But for his electorate in the US, it might work. He will tell people, I have saved the world economy, and thanks to my action, the markets are skyrocketing, blah, blah, blah. And frankly speaking, I mean, he has an absolute cynicism on everything, but politically, let's be modest, it might work.
It will probably work in one respect, and Robert Draper, who covers Republican politics for the New York Times, spoke pretty eloquently about this today in a newsletter written by Catherine Benhold, who's a terrific correspondent. But he talked about how Trump can probably sell this to a certain sector of the American electorate because they're not hearing anything. If they're watching only Fox News and right-wing media, they're not hearing about all of the things left on the table. They're not hearing about Iran clinging to the possibility that it could actually have nuclear weapons and enriched uranium after this is all over. No, all they're hearing about is the price of oil is going to come down, and the Strait of Hormuz is going to be reopened, and inflation is going to come down. That's all they're hearing. So I think you're probably right. He is smart and cynical in that respect. He's got a lot of help.
Smart and cynical. Jeffrey Sennenfield was on the programme, a professor who's done a critical critique of President Trump, saying Trump's 10 Commandments. He's known him for 25 years. He was asked to do it by Jared Kushner. It's very cutting. It's very brutal. But his point was he's as cunning as a fox. And if you watch the interview, if you watch that bit we saw when the deal was done, the first thing he does, oil down, stocks up. He makes it known. He knows exactly what's going on. Francis, your take here. We've had 2 capitulations, and let's see what happens.
I'm sort of in between the two because I do think the Iranian regime has been certainly emboldened. I mean, I can go back quite a few years as a junior reporter interviewing British naval captains who were on their way to the Straits of Hormuz, I think at the end of the 1980s, because there was tension there and threats that Iran would be throttling the oil supply to the world. It hasn't really happened in the way that we've seen it recently, and I think Iran suddenly realizes it's got its finger on a windpipe. It can cause an awful lot of problems, not just to the Straits of Hormuz, not just to the oil markets, the world economy, but also to its neighbours in the Middle East. So, I'm slightly, I sort of agree with both of you. I don't think this deal will last. I think something will happen. We've been seeing bombings in Lebanon overnight. Now we understand there is a ceasefire of sorts. We'll see how that holds up. But trying to tie the two together, I think it has emboldened the Iranian regime in a certain amount, and I think they know they've got a lot more power, certainly politically and perhaps economically, than they had before.
To another geopolitical conflict, to another meeting room at the G7. On Monday, President Zelensky sat down with President Trump for half an hour, the first face-to-face encounter in 4 months. Zelensky displayed photos of the damage to one of the oldest Christian monasteries in Eastern Europe, the Kiev Peshek Lavra, which was struck over the weekend by Russian missile and drone strikes on the capital. Reports suggesting he went on to explain the battlefield realities and Ukraine's military resilience, and that the US president was, quote, quite attentive. According to AP, Trump told fellow leaders he expected Iran would soon be back in the rearview mirror, and that he wanted to turn his attention, or more attention, to be exact, to Ukraine. Also this week, the headline, as Boyan and Anne mentioned, this massive fire of explosions. It was the Gazprom oil refinery in Moscow after more Ukrainian drone strikes. The Economist talk of Ukraine drawing a new picture in this war, quoting a Ukrainian diplomat, Alana Zerkal, saying this: Putin once tried to pretend the war was far away, she said. He can't do it when the Russians see smoke with their own eyes. Boyan, a notable change from Trump. You mentioned earlier that President Macron might think that. You don't.
A notable change in the sense that he's more supportive of Ukraine, you mean?
Yes.
Or, I didn't quite understand. Yeah, no, not really. I mean, he keeps zigzagging, like he promised to help strike a deal, and he's been alternating between some pressure on Putin and a lot of pressure on Zelensky. Now he's lost his leverage over both, really, because Zelensky doesn't really much care. There's nothing that, Trump's got to offer, right? The negotiations are going nowhere. I don't think anyone takes them seriously anymore. The Witkoff-Kushner negotiations with Ushakov and Kirill Dimitrov, the Russian negotiators. So, what is America giving to Ukraine? They're giving them intelligence still, and they're selling weapons to the Europeans, who are then sort of shipping them over to Kiev. So the lever's gone. Nobody really thinks that that Putin is ready to make a deal, and I think the pressure is now increasing from what Zelensky himself calls the sanctions, and by that he means the aerial bombardment of the energy infrastructure of Russia, in particular the refining infrastructure and the export infrastructure. So in a weird way, the war of economic attrition is now escalating because Ukraine has built up this capacity for deep strikes. And this is a homegrown capacity. I mean, built obviously with Western money, American money in the beginning, now European, but is largely Ukrainian know-how, and they're quite proud of it. And they own it, and they're developing it further. So in the near future, they'll be able to strike many more refineries like that, oil rigs, whatever.
Yes.
So I think the war of attrition kind of favors Kiev at the moment, because Kiev is getting this lifeline cash, from the Europeans, whereas Russia relies on the sale of hydrocarbons, and in that sense, it's more vulnerable.
And the optics
to Ukrainian.
To that point, Boyan, as well, and the optics of the headline making, and the headlines, as you and Anne pointed to, of seeing parts of Moscow on fire, the gas terminals. Richard, just listening to Boyan, you were in the room. You watched this kind of reflected atmosphere unfold this week. To Boyan's point, is there a correlation of the Ukraine drone success in hitting back? And, well, the Economist called it the G7 nudged at a window open for diplomacy. Is that fair?
Yeah, very true. I refer to a briefing we got from Emmanuel Macron entourage, diplomatic advisor, and two things were said during that briefing. The briefing took place right in the evening of Tuesday. Tuesday was the day during which Zelensky was at the G7. We were told, number one, that Zelensky initially was not supposed to stay the whole day. He was supposed to stay only for the Ukraine session. But he ended up staying the whole day as a G7 member, in a way. During that day, it was a G8, but not a G8 with Russia, a G8 with Ukraine. Second thing, when he had his bilateral talk with Trump, you've seen the photo. Where is Zelensky sitting? I'm quoting a French diplomat, in the chair of the presidency. He's using Macron's chair, he's sitting there to talk with Trump. So those are two small anecdotes, but I think what we've seen is clearly Ukraine accessing the rank of a player, a world player. And I would add something else. Ukraine not only had the European as allies during this G7, it had also the Arab countries, because Ukraine is now giving the Arab countries a way to defend themselves against the Iranian drone. And who was there at the G7? You had the president of the United Arab Emirates, you had the president of Qatar, you had the president of Egypt. And those three are actually in good term with Zelensky. So Zelensky clearly, let's say, he got into first league, diplomatically speaking, during that G7. Now, will it stay or not? As Macron say, there was a G7 moment, but you never know when the moment is going to be done.
Increasing the role of a world player, you say. To that point, there were new faces, a presence not just of the world leaders that Richard said, but the big tech at the table, the last working lunch at the G7, including Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, and Demis Hassabis, the chief of Google DeepMind. The reason for the invite, according to French officials, was because of the need to deliberately shift and treat AI and digital infrastructure as core geopolitical issues, that they're no longer just economic policy topics. Anna, seat at the table for big tech. It's a moment in itself, isn't it?
It is a moment, and it's an odd moment, because what I read about the point of view of the tech executives was they're very concerned about the different approaches to regulation, the EU AI Act versus what's happening in the United States. And if I remember correctly, one of the executives, might have even been the head of OpenAI, said, listen, you want governments to be regulating this. You don't want the companies themselves to be regulating it. And I think that's what the European Union is doing. Yet, if they were there to try to persuade the Americans that they're taking the wrong view in having the companies themselves either police themselves or lobby hard to get the states to soften their approach, that is perhaps the message we're meant to take away from this. I do find it interesting that in a gathering of this sort, with so many other issues on the table, time was, a considerable amount of time and attention was spent on this at this moment. But it's not my full area, but perhaps there's something coming down the pike that that made this a necessary meeting.
Well, one of those things to that point, and it could well be, Francis, the issue European leaders say they want more answers on, which is Anthropic's frontier AI models, which is Mythos, and the publicly available one, Fable 5, which they launched and suddenly was suspended because the White House said there's a national security ground subtext. And they wanted answer to this. I mean, this is striking, isn't it? Because there seems to be more to it than meets the eye on this story.
Yeah, people I know who work in this business have said that there has been a fair bit of tension between the White House and Anthropic, disagreements over its use, certainly within government areas, certainly within the Department of Defense, and that frontier AI is very important. But of course, the United States is much further ahead. So when it is turned off, as it has been, and I think there was some nuance there where the White House was saying it needs to be turned off for foreign companies and foreigners within the United States. And Anthropic said, we can't do this, so we're just going to turn it off. That provokes the reaction in Europe. Talk of the French version Mistral, but
because there's also a critical need. It's for hospitals. It's so integrated.
It certainly is. The problem is that they are way ahead. And I was told by a colleague today who's an expert on this that to the tune of billions they are way ahead with their AI models compared to the European fledgling models. So it's almost a sense. It's like a component. It's like a trade deal. We can stop this, or we can give it to you. So there is concern, and I think you're right about regulation. I think history tells us that, with any new technology, those that provide it shouldn't be trusted to regulate it. We've seen this many times. We saw this with YouTube, which, if you remember, 10, 12, 15 years ago had some terrible things on it, and they were struggling to regulate that. It's always the same with new technology. Governments are slow. They have to catch up.
And it's an odd parallel state of affairs here, because this is a dependency on structures they don't control, which takes us to something else going on in the UK. Richard, if you've seen this, I know if you have, Francis, which is the announcement of Keir Starmer, you mentioned it at the top, Francis, to switch off, or at least not to switch off, but try to stop under-16s using social media. And not the first country to do this.
No, well, that's a fight that President Macron is putting up as well. President Macron is very keen, and he wanted to talk. He actually managed to have the G7 talk about it, the possibility of forbidding teenagers under a certain age to access certain content online. But we do not know the result of the discussion. There was no clear communique on that, and we do not know what Trump said, if he said something or if he listened on the subject. I believe Australia is far ahead on that respect, and President Macron mentioned Australia during his press conference. The question now is, again, what the US will do, because Trump is all about maintaining the advantage over China at any cost. So he doesn't want anybody to regulate the American giant of the internet for that specific reason. And when he arrived in Evian at the summit, he said to Macron, if you regulate my internet companies, I'll put 100% on your wines and spirits, which is always, a trigger that frightens everybody in France. So when it comes to AI, I think Trump is on the side that whatever the cost is, America should maintain its advance over China.
And Boyan, I know you will have covered this from your time in Austria as well. Britain not the only government that's been looking at this, that's putting plans in place to either limit or restrict, very broad in the UK, slightly different in Austria. But the kickback is this. Snapchat, Meta saying this week, the governments are being irresponsible because it will backfire. They say it will drive children, is their argument, to unregulated alternatives.
I'm not sure. I actually, just to correct you a little bit from earlier, I moved from Germany to Madrid last year. So the Spanish government is also looking at a similar model of limiting access, and as are other governments. I think this is becoming a trend in Western societies. You have to also remember that China, nobody ever talks about it, but China severely limits access to certain things, obviously for the entire population, but certainly also for children. So I think that we are segueing into a new regulatory phase, it would appear. I mean, whether it will work or not, it's hard to know, but it's possible. The way they do it with cigarettes and alcohol and whatever, there's always a way to obtain it, right? But for the vast majority, perhaps a limitation like that could potentially work. It's
Yes.
We'll see, but certainly it's bubbling up. It's not just a number of countries are looking at this and looking at it closely.
Bojan, great to have you on with us tonight. Thank you, all of you. An excellent panel tonight. Keep your claws, your ChatGPTs, your Groks. They can type the type. This panel can talk the talk and walk the walk on the ground, seeing, gathering, reporting in style. Thank you, Richard Worley, Europe correspondent for Blick, author, award winner of the books as well, Cette Amérique qui nous déteste, This America That Hates Us, and The Ball of Illusion. Thank you, Richard. In Madrid, the Wall Street Journal's chief European political correspondent, Bojan. Thank you, Bojan Pančevski, the author of The Nord Stream Conspiracy, released this week. All the best with the book. And in the studio, thank you to Anne Bagger-Marie, independent journalist, media consultant. Have a great weekend, Anne. And the Paris-based independent correspondent, Francis Collins. Thank you, Francis. Have a great weekend too. Thank you for watching and listening on the podcast version. We've made it into the top 10 this week of the world's best podcasts on global affairs, according to Million Podcast Ranking. We'll leave you tonight with the brilliantly British Monty Python-like staple of the UK by-election. That is Cleese and Idle. They couldn't have written this better. And the thought that in Makerfield this week, a man wearing a bin on his head and another in a fox suit can stand next to a potential next Prime Minister of the UK. Here's a very serious interview with Count Binface of the Binface Party, who received 95 votes, 94 more than he hoped. See you in 7 days for The World next week.
How many votes do you think you're going to get?
Well, I'd be happy with one.
Do you live in the constituency?
I do tonight.
Well, it sounds as though you don't.
What do you?
No, of course not. I don't live here, no.